Hey everyone, and welcome to Private Podcast, where we plug in and explore the intersection of privacy, human rights, technology, and democracy. I'm your host, Derek E. Silva. Today we're speaking with Matthew Guariglia. Matthew is a policy analyst working on issues of surveillance and privacy at the local, state, and federal level at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. He received a PhD in history at the University of Connecticut, where his research focused on the intersection of race, immigration, U.S. imperialism, and policing in New York City. He is a frequent contributor to the Freedom of Information centered outlet Muck Rock, and his bylines have also appeared in the Washington Post, Slate, and Motherboard. He is also a visiting scholar in the Department of History at UC Berkeley and serves as an editor of Disciplining the City, which is a series on the history of urban policing and incarceration at the Urban History Association's blog called The Metropole. Matthew, thanks for the time to be here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here to chat with you.
Can you talk a little bit about your background and what led you to becoming a policy analyst?
Sure. Yeah, so I have a degree in history. I'm a historian by training, which many people might think does not lend itself perfectly to studying the future of digital privacy. But what I had discovered in graduate school was that many of the debates people were having at the invention of policing, at the growth of surveillance, which really corresponded with the growth of the ability of governments to collect information. So the invention of the filing cabinet, the first incidents of wiretapping, things like that, that many of those same debates that happened back then are still very much happening now. And the fact that I was seeped in a century of that conversation lend my skills to getting involved with those current debates and advocating for privacy in our current moment and knowing the historical roots of those debates. Not to mention that in addition to being a historian, I've spent the last few years, as somebody who was very publicly engaged on issues of surveillance and national security and civil liberties, with a lot of work in Freedom of Information Act requesting and investigative reporting. So all of those things lend themselves toward a career as a policy analyst.
Cool. Please tell me you remember what some of the debates around the invention of the filing cabinet were, because as soon as you said that, I'm like, really? Was there actually a major debate around the invention of the filing cabinet? And I guess like using it and maybe like police records, like was that the issue there?
Yeah, I mean, there were big debates in the early 20th century that the more information police requested, and the more information they were able to hoard, not just on people who were found guilty or people who were arrested, but on like anybody brought into the station who was fingerprinted or had their mugshot taken, even if they were later acquitted or even if they were let go, the fact that this information was just being hoarded and kept by police was a way of wearing away their presumption of innocence. That it hurt your reputation to have your information on file with the police department because if you hadn't done anything wrong, why did they have your information? And so
Right.
we see a lot of similar questions today about reputation and data and whether or not police departments quote unquote trust people or whether or not we still have a full presumption of innocence because of how much information about us police departments have access to.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's fair. I guess a big part of that is then, and I don't know how widely this is practiced, especially here in Canada, but like, you're booked, right? So you get fingerprinted, you get your mug shots. Even if charges are dropped, you're acquitted, especially. All that information is retained. And so I guess it probably makes you a target in any follow up investigations for a similar crime that's being investigated because, well, your name came up before, so why not this time? I guess that's part of the issue, right?
Yeah, and I mean being booked is, on one end of the spectrum, but I mean you have, people in Los Angeles who were put on a gang database by the LAPD because when the LAPD happened to encounter them in a traffic stop, they were wearing a specific sports jersey. I mean, you also have like things like the Department of Motor Vehicles or the State Department who has access to driver's license and passport photos, who have compiled these into massive databases, which are used for face recognition and shared with federal and local law enforcement. So it's not just anymore being booked by police. It's kind of any encounters with the government can wind you in one of these massive databases.
That's yeah, okay, that's fair. Um, on the color issue, got like sports jersey, color your clothing. I was listening to another podcast recently, and I guess in places like Illinois and in Florida back in the mid to late 90s, starter jackets were just like not allowed at school because wearing a certain team's starter jacket associated you with some group. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, like 1994, 1995, yes, starter jackets were incredibly popular at my school, but we didn't have that same association with any sort of outside thing. It was just like, oh, you're wearing a Chicago Bulls starter jacket, like that's cool.
I,
So it was really interesting to hear the difference in perception across the border there.
and this is like a really important lesson for all of us to learn about, both historically and in our current moment, about how police learn about things. That when police learn information, it is filtered through their particular biases, often through racial biases, um, and weaponized in a way. So if, for instance, police have this impression that a Chicago Bulls jacket is a signifier of criminal activity, then any people they encounter after the fact with a Chicago Bulls jacket are filtered through that biases and that lens. And so it's really a story of how police understand information, how they process it, and then ultimately how they weaponize it, how it can be used against people to justify harassment and surveillance.
Yeah, yeah, and these are at the time it would have been like late elementary, early high school kids. So it was really interesting to hear that it was just like not allowed in certain schools, at least in the U.S. Um, so I guess this kind of all led you to becoming um, a privacy advocate, more or less. Was there like one particular moment, or is it just really the culmination of studying all this history, having these debates, recognizing that these debates happen over and over and over again, that just ended up with you becoming such an advocate for privacy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a lot of things. There are a lot of historical examples in which uh, hoarded information gets used in terrible ways. One of the great examples is of all of the information that had been collected by police in Germany in the 19 teens and 1920s, which of course gets utilized when a new Nazi regime comes into power and has at their fingertips really detailed files on millions of Germans. It's like one of those prime examples from history about what's the worst that could happen just because police have this information on you. Well, it's like, well,
Yeah,
you don't know who's eventually going to inherit this information. And
right.
it's the fact that privacy is not a philosophical issue. It's not purely like something that white guys can like sit in armchairs and wax poetic about, like the loss of privacy. I mean, privacy and surveillance is a real harmful issue to a lot of Americans, primarily, undocumented people, unhoused people, people of color, LGBT people, who have to deal with not only a higher concentration of surveillance and surveillance directed at them, but also, when this technology goes wrong, when face recognition gets it wrong, when this technology is weaponized to ticket people, nonstop, automatically, that the people who are hurt, sometimes physically, by this very directed and pointed surveillance are often these most marginalized and vulnerable people in society. And so I think that's one of the things that's most motivated me in recent years to be, an advocate in this issue.
Fair enough. And so I guess eventually that led you to be working with the EFF directly or working for the EFF. We've had a couple of guests on the show before from Electronic Frontier Foundation. Cindy Kahn is a prime example. I think she's executive director. Just wondering, from your perspective, what do you feel like the EFF does and contributes, and your role in that?
Yeah, I mean, so I first learned of EFF's work in 2013 during the whole Snowden revelations. I really got to appreciate their knack for breaking down what is sometimes incredibly complicated legal and technological issues for everyday readers, to understand, not just what issues are out there, but like why they should be concerned about them, in very direct and easy to understand terms. What EFF contributes to that I think is really interesting, is that its makeup is, it's attorneys, it's people who are specialized in legislation and policy and advocacy. It's activists who are, trained in grassroots organizing, who are in touch with different civil rights groups all across the country. And then it's technologists who are not only capable of breaking down and understanding, invasive software, and tech and surveillance technology, but who are capable of building products that actually counter that. So it is a kind of one-stop shop for technology, civil liberties, and advocacy.
Fair enough. As a nonprofit defending digital civil liberties, being capable of actually building tools to counteract privacy invasive tools, what do you think some of the biggest challenges are that people face within surveillance and privacy today?
Um, I think some of it is inertia. It's that, it's hard to pass, for instance, consumer privacy legislation, which is 20 years too late, in terms of protecting users. And, there's been a lot of great work done at the state level. If you think about like the Biometric Privacy Act in Illinois, or the, Consumer Privacy Act here in California. But part of it is inertia. Part of it is it's difficult to get the legislation we need desperately passed. Another thing is that the boundaries that used to exist between federal and local law enforcement, between law enforcement and uh, private enterprise, technology companies, all of that is breaking down. If a company collects data on you, police can get it. If the federal government, if intelligence agencies gather information about you, somehow that can wind up in the hands of local police. So all of these boundaries that used to be in place are slowly breaking down, and it's making it harder and harder to fight, because you're having to fight one giant, Kraken, of invasive surveillance, rather than discrete institutions.
Not Seattle Kraken, like more like the actual mythical.
Exactly. Yes.
For any hockey fans out there. Yeah, no, I totally get that. It does seem like an uphill battle at times, or when we do, we, the collective we, is, the people who care about privacy, we get a win, then we find out about NSO groups, Pegasus spyware, or something else happens. We're like, privacy advocates and technologists put so much effort into building better tools, into getting Google to back down on certain privacy invasive defaults and stuff like that on Android and Google Maps. And then here comes this thing that ends up on thousands of journalists' cell phones and government elected representative cell phones and smartphones and people like that. And just literally just hoovering up data to pass back to NSO groups, customers. So yeah, and there's I think the U.S. government, or maybe an agency, has introduced some new rules recently around the selling of those types of tools, like the one NSO Group makes, to directly to like China and Russia. But I think we all recognize that there's always a way around that, whether you go through another reseller that's based in like Saudi Arabia and doesn't care, or something like that. These tools seem to inevitably end up in the wrong people's hands, quote unquote, or at least not NSO Group's intended customers, or another security firm's intended customers, or for the purposes that they advertise that their people are supposed to use them for. Um, we're into the last quarter of 2021. I'm wondering if the EFF is starting already to plan for 2022, and if so, what sort of initiatives around civil liberties, digital privacy, etc., that the EFF is looking to to work on next year?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to continue the fights that we've been working on for the last few years. I know encryption is going to be an increasingly important battle, fighting for consumer privacy, fighting against face recognition. I mean, we have made so much progress along with, the greater landscape of civil rights groups, civil liberties group, immigration rights groups. Uh, at the local and state level in terms of things like banning predictive policing, banning face recognition on the municipal level. And so those fights are all going to continue, and they're only, I think, gaining momentum.
Do you feel like any of that is an inevitability in the sense that no matter how much pushback we provide, I remember San Francisco banning facial recognition, or like some sort of temporary ban at least until facial recognition is better and can be demonstrated to be better and more accurate a few years ago. Do you feel like, at some point that they're just gonna give up, and or at least some aspect or some segments are just gonna give up and be like, yeah, sure, fine, whatever, we'll do facial recognition, and Sidewalk Labs can have whatever data they want from this development they build in not in Toronto because that's not happening, but maybe elsewhere. Like, do you feel like there maybe people are just tired of fighting, or maybe the opposite? Like, do you feel like more people are actually joining the fight instead?
I think quite the opposite, actually, because I think, tech issues are less niche now. I think through some like absolutely incredible scholarship and work through places like the Algorithmic Justice League, we're really understanding now more and more that you know tech issues are civil rights issues, they're racial justice issues, and so I think more and more people are joining the fight. There's been so much great investigative reporting on the use of tech and the collaboration between technology companies and, for instance, like immigration enforcement. There's been so much great reporting about the wrongs that face recognition have done, and the arrests under false circumstances, and all of the cases related to face recognition use in Detroit. So I think the momentum is growing. I think more and more people are getting involved. And I think that we're finally starting to see a real backlash against, what people have presumed has been privacy nihilism. That people have said, you know what, they already have my data, who
Right.
cares? But I think what we're seeing now is that people are kind of fed up with that. And people see at the municipal level that there are things to be done and that there are things we can achieve. And I really do think that it's moving in the right direction.
Okay, that's good to hear. Optimism is always always a good thing to hear on the show. Uh, Looks like congratulations are in order. You recently announced that you have a book under contract with Duke Press. That's fantastic. Can you tell us
Yeah,
a little
thank
bit more
you.
about the book? What's the topic about? Where are you at with that?
Yeah, the I'm revising and writing and doing a bit more additional research right now, but the book is a retelling of the origins of modern policing, centering race and ethnicity and immigration, and U.S. empire as well. So it ties into technology in a big way, in the sense that what the book essentially concludes is that the rise of biometrics, of surveillance, of the use of information as a central key component of policing emerges after a series of failures in which the New York City Police Department either is unable or really unwilling to go into Black and immigrant communities and attempt to like interface and create good relationships with the community.
Hmm.
You don't have to be able to have goodwill with witnesses and with neighbors if you can just go into a room and find a fingerprint and get a suspect that way. And so these technologies really emerge through an inability of police departments to forge good relationships with communities. You don't need that relationship if in a modern sense, if you have cameras who spot the witness when who spot the suspect when witnesses aren't willing to talk to police. And so it's a telling of that story. And I think
Hmm.
it's really important that we kind of move away from the foundational myths that we hear about the modern police department of, London bobbies coming over to Boston and bestowing them with the first copper badge, and that race and ethnicity have always been very central to why police departments look and act the way they do.
That's a really interesting take on it, and I imagine you have the research to back it up, or else you probably wouldn't have gotten a book contract in the first place. Sounds pretty crucial to the book existing in the first place. I certainly hadn't thought of it that way before, and I'm not going to pretend that I have a similar issue here. I live in a very affluent neighborhood, and that's actually experiencing what I'm calling reverse gentrification. We're actually having a lot more diverse people moving in than it has been in the past, which I'm quite happy about. But when I was on my municipal council, I had this issue with police, is that there is no community policing, which is what, at least here in Canada, we call the approach that New York City should have been taking in, engaging with the community, being, walking the beat, actually talking to people, and therefore having connections to help solve crimes when, you know who to turn to, of like, oh, let's go talk to Mary, or let's go talk to Joe. We know that they've got their ear to the ground, and they'll be able to help us find the right people who can give us the information we need in order to solve this murder or this theft. We have no relationship with the Ontario Provincial Police here. It's literally completely on demand. We occasionally get them patrolling through and just, a quick little drive by, despite the fact that like a dozen police officers live in the neighborhood. There's no community policing presence whatsoever, except for maybe they're at a fair or something like that. But there's we miss that here. Thankfully, we don't need it as much. But every once in a while, there is a rash of break-ins, or there's a vandalism issue because people are bored because there's COVID and you couldn't go anywhere for a little while there, and there's no information to share because there's no relationships, and people often stick to themselves. So at a very 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 minor level, I see that play out here, but yeah, I could definitely see it playing out at a far more significant level in that type of environment, especially in a highly populated city.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's where things like cameras, and that's where historically things like fingerprinting have come in, where police
Yeah.
can find that evidence without having those relationships. But I will say, I mean, community policing itself is also not a silver bullet. I mean, people walked a beat and knew the
No.
communities before they were put in cars, and police
Mm.
brutality was just as much of an issue then as it was now. Um, so it's community policing, walking a beat and knowing people does not community trust make, so to speak.
No, sure, but I feel like it further divorces the police as purely an enforcement agency as opposed to a trusted community partner or something like that. Like, part of the issue here is that we don't we don't even have a contract with them. It's literally, if you don't have your own police force, you just default to the OPP.
Mm.
So London, Ontario has their own police force. Toronto obviously has their own. Lots of areas do. A lot of smaller rural communities like mine don't. And so you either can have an actual contract in place with the OPP that has certain or stipulations, or by default you end up with them. But there's no oversight. There's no relationship even between municipal council and the OPP. It's just a bill every year that we get, and maybe an annual visit to fill in council on how things are going. So I'm just talking about, like, it's one part of it, and then it just leads to further problems later, because there is no relationship whatsoever, and I know one of the police officers, but like, I knew him from before he became a police officer, not after, and so I have a relationship with him. But I also know I can't just call him on his cell phone and be like, "There's been a break in." Like, I'm gonna go through the proper channels.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's just I'm an advocate for it because I think it helps build trust, and makes it more likely problems get solved as opposed to being purely enforcement driven and coming into any community and just having an attitude of, we're here to find some bad guys, and as soon as we find them, we're going to take them and then we're going to leave, and then you're never going to see us again until the next time.
And the distrust cuts both ways, I find, in the sense that police have cultivated distrust with communities over many many years, but also police signify their distrust of people and of communities when you think about things like face recognition, right? It's they have a giant database of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of faces, and when a robbery were to occur and they take some grainy security camera footage and they put it through a face recognition and it compares that suspect's face to millions of faces, all of our faces, what they're saying is that you, person who has never done anything wrong, or even if you have done anything wrong, you're not more likely to commit crimes. uh, we suspect you. We are comparing your face to this person's face because you are a potential person who might be committing criminal activity. And that's distrust. That sows
Yeah.
distrust. It signals to people that the police don't trust us.
We zoomed, we enhanced, we know it's you.
Yeah.
um Can you also tell us a little bit more about being an affiliated scholar at the Institute of Criminal Justice at Berkeley, the Hastings School of Law specifically? What are you researching there? What's that work like?
Yeah, so I had just finished up 2 years as a visiting research scholar in the history department at UC Berkeley, and I've moved to being an affiliate scholar at UC Hastings School of Law. It's fairly new. I get to use their library, which is very fancy and nice. But really, they're giving me a lot of the resources I need to continue to write and research the book I've been working on, and to continue my understanding of the long history of how police have used technology, and how they continue to use technology, and in the ways that watching police use technology can clue us into how little police departments as an institution have evolved. Um, in the sense that the technology might look different. It might be digital now, it might be automated, but police are asking technology now to do the same things they were asking it to do 100 years ago. You know, in 1900, police used to literally measure the distance between people's eyes, or the length of their nose, or the length of their ear, in order to figure out who they are. What is face recognition but that exact thing just happening automated and
Yeah,
without a physical tape
yeah,
measure? And so if you look at all the technology, it might seem fancy, it might cost municipalities a lot of money, but we're ultimately asking that technology to do exactly the same things we've been asking it to do for over 100 years, which I think kind of undermines the myth that policing has become really modern, and has changed a lot in the last 100 years.
yeah. No, I mean, you get police officers with laptops in their cars and, yeah, automated license plate readers and that sort of thing. But ultimately, a lot of that was, either you're doing pen and paper, which obviously has its faults as well, or you're calling in back to a dispatcher of some kind and saying like, hey, run this plate, make sure everything's cool, and stuff like that. So it sped things up. I would say it's made them
Oh
more
yeah.
efficient potentially, but made them more efficient at finding people doing, at least in my case, pulling me over because I got pulled over 2 years ago in my truck because just because of when our daughter was born. My wife was on mat leave and just
Mhm.
didn't care about renewing her driver's license at the time, and just like, you can drive me everywhere for now until I get to the Ministry of Transportation, and I'll get this done eventually. I was driving the truck, but the police officer pulled us over in a very confrontational manner. Was like, yeah, asking me like, "Is your license up? Or who's got the expired license?" Like,
Mhm.
I don't know. Like, my license, here's mine. Like, mine's in good shape. Well, there's a driver in this vehicle has an expired license, and my wife's in the back seat with her daughter, like, oh yeah, that's me, and I'm in the back seat. Like, what's the attitude for? It's like that's great that the automated license plate reader on your vehicle brought up this alert. That's fine, but
Yeah.
like you probably saw what the name was of the expired license, and you have mine in your hand, and everybody just take a chill pill. Like it
But
was just
that's a great example of how this technology is often kind of essentially dragnet technology.
yeah.
That why did their license plate reader run your license? Had you done something wrong? Had you done a traffic violation? Or is it just running every single license it comes across in hopes of finding something wrong
Yeah.
so they can pull people over? I mean, that's a perfect example of
Yeah.
the kind of dragnet and the fact that everybody is to be regarded with suspicion even if they're doing nothing wrong.
Yes. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was the latter, or because otherwise there was. I can almost guarantee you there's no other reason. And he mentioned nothing else. There was no your turning signal is out. You were speeding. You braked really hard. You were driving radically. Nothing. It was just it's super confrontational. Very over an expired license for the woman sitting in the back seat, not for the driver. So like yeah, it's thankfully I look like what I look like because that's roughly where it ended. But I can only imagine where that could have gone if under any other circumstance, whether it was my license that was expired or I looked different or I was a jerk or what have you. So, but I tried to be really polite because I knew I had done nothing wrong, and I was just like, well, we'll see what he wants. He's just very very confrontational for well, at least what I thought was no reason. So anyway, I certainly didn't have any dead bodies hanging out the back of the truck. So um got out this little pause here, Chris. So more on current topical news, and I maybe along the same lines. Amazon recently unveiled this little surveillance robot for your house, almost like a Roomba, but with better cameras and some other interactive things. Did you take a look at that when it was released? What are your feelings about that? At least your hot take, since you have to apply for one to get one. Like there's a whole bunch of hoops people still have to go through to get one of these preview models. But what's your hot take, or what's your take after doing a little bit of research on this sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, the worst case scenario that comes to my mind is, you know, who might be able to get access to this thing that has microphones and cameras and isn't just stationary like a security camera, but can actually roll around and search your home. Um,
Yeah.
and what might they see? I mean, I just have this vision of police being able to serve a search warrant, not to you to enter your home, but to Amazon, and getting control of your robot, and being the first time that police can search a person's home without ever having to step foot in it, or without having to serve the search warrant directly to the owner of the house. Um,
Yeah.
that's something that's a vision that comes to mind for a dark future. But I mean, I think it also has implications um, for survivors of stalking and domestic violence. If you have a significant other who you split up with, who retains shared password and login information to your home
Oh.
robot, they can, who knows what they can see and hear. Not to mention people who repeat and reuse passwords and usernames. This has been a key for people who just stuff leaked credentials into different um, you know programs to see what they can get into. And like, they had this problem with Amazon Ring a few years ago, where people were just plugging in leaked password and username combinations from other websites until they found people who also had a Ring camera. And once they logged into people's internal Ring cameras inside their houses, they were able to shout racial epithets at them, and talk to their children and harass them and watch them in their own home. And so that's also my concern, is what happens if you don't have great security and privacy hygiene, and somebody logs into your robot and is using this thing to roll around your house. So all of
Yeah.
these things concern me. In some ways, it's a larger concern just about Internet of Things and about putting microphones and cameras inside your home. Um, but this thing is particularly bad because it's not stationary. That you can roll it to different parts of the house.
Yeah. They also have a flying one.
Yeah, so I voiced concerns about the flying one when they first introduced it, and I was reassured that the flying one flies a set path. You can't it's not like remote controlled. You
Oh, okay.
can't just like fly it into a
Right.
bathroom, look around what's going on, and return to the dock. It flies a set path. But the robot, you can roll around,
Yes.
like it's a remote controlled car or something.
The robot's more like a robot, a remote controlled Johnny Five from Short Circuit.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
look like you might just be old enough to remember that movie. So
And the thing that absolutely kills me about it is just that it has cup holders, uh, because the tech utility wasn't enough. They need to invent a reason why people might actually want to use it, and one of them is cup holders.
I'm really hoping somebody can hack it to like fetch you a beer. Like,
I think some of the use examples they have are like, because it might have face recognition equipped, as you can say, hey, go bring Derek a beer, and the robot knows Derek by face and rolls over and offers it a beer from the cup holder.
I'm both excited and frightened by this potential future.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, like from the convenience side of thing, of course, it would be amazing if I could
Yeah,
literally tell a robot to go
I mean,
get me a
robots
beer.
are
Like,
robots are
why?
cool.
Yes, my problem is that this is built by Amazon
Exactly. Yes. I mean, I think
ultimately, and I don't think we're at the point where this, and I'm pretty sure they're not at the point where they're doing this all on device. If it was all on device and nothing got back to Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, whomever to improve the product, that's one thing. But I know they're going to ask me to opt in to sharing data in order to improve the product, which honestly, of course, you would ask, right? Like, I get it. But my concern is what format that's in, and of course the storage issues you mentioned. I do remember, pretty sure it was Amazon Ring, employees back at like this Ukrainian
yes.
data, video screening center for accidental or like security issues. Like people just trolling through video archives, seeing what they could find or listening to whatever they could find, and like that's the real problem. It's not so much that the data is shared, especially if you very blatantly put this prompt in front of me that's we're gonna if you say yes, we're going to share XYZ, and I say yes, it's the data security around those recordings then, and whether they're just like hashed data marks that only an AI is going to go through in order to keep improving or what have you, or if it's actually people. And I don't have any internal security cameras. I'm very much against that. I have a single doorbell video or video doorbell that is not from it's not from one of the big companies, but it's also not from some random fly by night
Mhm.
Chinese firm either. And I refuse to put any cameras on the inside of my house because
Yeah,
I don't I just don't need it. Like
and I
I I'm,
think
I'm not in a position where I need that. I don't live in a place where I need that, thankfully.
Yeah, and I think some people, if they want security cameras, they are entitled to them. If they make you feel safer in your own home, why not? But yeah, I mean, I think you have to think about um, where the data is stored, what it could collect on you, what it could collect on your neighbors, on pedestrians, on people who have to work by delivering things to your front door. So I think there are a lot of
Yeah.
other implications, and all of those are heightened if you don't store the data yourself. And I also think we give a lot of press to video. Video is like, oh, that's the scary thing, but these devices collect audio from much further away than I think a lot of people realize. And so,
Yeah.
if you start having moments where, you won't have very personal conversations in certain rooms of your house because there's an internet connected device with a microphone there, or if you're moving personal conversations further away from your front door because you think your front door camera could capture, voices coming in from the other side of the door from inside, then
Yeah.
what are we saying about privacy in the home if we're moving the most personal conversations we can have to different parts of our home? I think that's like a really fascinating and odd development that we're
Yeah.
ceding whole portions of our lives and our private space to companies for the convenience of being able to say, like, Alexa, what's the weather going to be like?
Cancel. Just just in case somebody's Amazon Echo went off.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I see. I don't use them, so I don't consider that. Yeah, I'm so sorry, everyone.
That's okay. At least we're not a TV commercial triggering millions of people's devices. Like there was a Super Bowl ad a couple
I
years
remember
ago
that.
where
Yeah.
they said the A word, and like a bunch of people were tweeting like, "Hey, what the heck?"
Yeah.
Which I think the fix was like to make sure it was if you were going to insert it into a commercial, you had to do it at a certain frequency or bit rate, and then it wouldn't get triggered, which I thought was really interesting. Um, but I don't know how long that held for.
Yeah.
So coming to the end of our time here, so I want to make sure I ask at least some more forward-reaching questions. Where do you see digital privacy and human rights being 5 years from now? Do you think we've made some improvements? At least we've gained more than we've lost between now and then, or do you think we're kind of at this stalemate? I don't think we're going to lose more than we gain, but I do potentially see either some stalemate where China, US, UK, maybe Canada, are making certain laws that make it harder to achieve privacy. But at the same time, maybe we're making some technological gains. So at worst, a stalemate, ideally gains overall. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah. It's hard because, fighting surveillance is a bit like a game of whack-a-mole. You will push companies, you will push police departments, and you finally will create a concession, a line in the sand. Fine, you asked us not to put face recognition on rings, so for the time being, we're not going to do that. And then another company will come in out of nowhere and say, "Hey, did you want face recognition on your ring, but Amazon won't give it to you? We have software. We'll do it for you." And so it's hard because every time you think you've made a win, somebody else sees it as a profit making enterprise and moves into that space. So it's hard. I think on the upside, I'm very encouraged by the spread of movements banning face recognition and predictive policing. I'm really heartened by a new momentum on questioning whether or not we need fusion centers, which were created in the wake of 9/11, and which are supposed to interface between local police departments and federal law enforcement and intelligence agencies for sharing information. But really, what we've seen is that in the absence of real kind of national security emergencies, these fusion centers have been trafficking in misinformation. They've been dealing with low-level crime and a lot of political policing, a lot of looking at protests. So there's a renewed movement questioning whether or not we need fusion centers, and that's been really encouraging. And I really think that we are finally, hopefully, going to get some federal consumer privacy laws because we seem to be more and more reaching hopefully what I hope is a bipartisan consensus that big tech is out of control, and that
Yeah.
something needs to be done to rein in all this information, where it's going, who has access to it, and I hope that will be done sooner rather than later.
I mean, I think it kind of has to happen during this administration now, during the Biden and Harris administration. If it doesn't, we have no idea who will be elected next, and what their position will be on data privacy, especially all the data that the NSA and FBI and CIA and state and local law enforcement agencies have collected. So yeah, ideally now would be better than later,
Um,
because we don't know if later will happen or not.
and in terms of my biggest concerns right now, I've been really concerned watching the growth of geofence warrants and other kind of
Mm,
keyword or reverse warrants. So, for instance, police can do something like if there's vandalism, they can send Google a reverse warrant, which isn't information about one particular phone of somebody who they, suspect did the vandalism. So they went to a judge, they presented their evidence, the judge wrote them a warrant saying that Google should turn over this information in order to benefit the investigation. A reverse warrant or a geofence warrant or a keyword warrant is the reverse. It is police say there was vandalism. I need a warrant that I can send to Google, which will give me uh, identifying information on all phones in the vicinity of the vandalism within a certain time
yeah.
frame. And it is uh, trying to trying to legally justify what is essentially dragnet policing. Um, and these warrants have been growing very quickly, and their use has been growing. I think I read about one case where there was arson, and police sent a warrant to Google for IP addresses for anybody who Google Maps the house that got burned. So
Jeez.
if you were a delivery driver trying to deliver pizza to that house and you Google Maps it,
Hmm.
suddenly you might be implicated and a suspect in this arson. So the rise of reverse warrants, which are egged on by uh, all of the data that big tech are collecting, and also often big tech's um, reluctance to fight back against this kind of tactic on the from law enforcement. That's been a major concern of mine, and I've been very anxiously watching it become more popular over the last year or two.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that pop up in the news, and that's it is a worrying development as well. Okay, we have come up to the hour. Matthew, thank you so much for spending some time with us here this afternoon, or whatever time it is when you're listening to this episode of Private Podcast. If people want to follow along with what you're doing, where should they go?
They can follow me on Twitter at mguariglia, or they can look at my profile on EFF's website, which gets update periodically with all the interesting new things I'm up to.
Terrific. Thanks again for your time, and everybody, thank you very much for listening. Until next time, stay free.